This is the Next Best Picture podcast, and today I am joined by the man who does it all behind Eephus, Carson Lund. Carson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, appreciate it, man. Thank you for having me.
Hey, before we start, I just want to I said I saw the movie for the first time at NIF, which I want to say it's very brave of you to mention the Red Sox opening there, and then everyone proceeded to boo in a crowd of New Yorkers. So I will applaud you for that. That was very brave. And I think when you
Yeah.
watch Eephus, it's you don't have to be a complete fanatic in terms of writing or directing a film about sports, but it's clear that you capture an essence of background baseball, of very local juvie baseball where the kids grew up. I assume you upbringing in New Hampshire, had a lot of baseball coming up.
Yes, in fact, for sure. I grew up in New England and I am a Red Sox fan. I felt that it's important to start with a little antagonism and then win everyone back, with the film, hopefully. Yeah, baseball was like very, very central to my life for a very long time, basically up until high school, and I kind of pivoted to filmmaking and came back to baseball later in my life. But yeah, I was a middle infielder, still am. And I played for I played Little League. I fell in love with it in Little League and eventually played in traveling leagues when my dad figured out that I was a little bit above average and had a chance to maybe make it a serious endeavor in my life. And just over time, I grew a bit exhausted by the culture of it and the kind of people that I was playing with, and there was too much pressure and to succeed, and I got more interested in film and music and sort of yeah, just shifted my focus. But for sure, it's like really it shaped my early life, absolutely. And then coming back to it as an adult here in California, knowing you can play year round, I just found that I had a very different relationship to the game once the pressure was off, once it was basically a group of adults sharing a passion and getting together once a week to do the thing they love and kind of find like carving out that time to just have a recreational experience and run around. I mean, it sort of connects you back to something you enjoyed in childhood, and I think that sort of planted the seed and got the ideas flowing for building a film around this world.
And you mentioned you had this upbringing in baseball, you pivoted to film, and you wanted to grow in that field. Uh, a film you've mentioned that is very, in essence, similar to Eephus, Goodbye Dragon Inn. I'm curious, was that film very early in terms of your film experience, in terms of watching films and what molded you as you wanted to be a filmmaker? Was that later on after you decided to make this pivot and you're kind of wondering, what is my style going to be like? Who am I going to be as a filmmaker? And then that film came into you at like the right time. I'm curious, like, where did that place in your life?
Yeah, I would say I had a pretty early interest in world cinema and art cinema because I have to credit my local library where I worked as a
Mhm.
kid. In junior high and high school, I worked there, and we had a pretty phenomenal DVD section. And I had sort of carte blanche to just take out whatever I want. I eventually had like a recommendation shelf, and so at a young age, I was kind of really. I actually had the guy who bought all the DVDs. I had his ear, so I could kind of ask for things. Um, and I think when I started exploring what was then called and probably still called slow cinema or world festival cinema
Mhm.
that was popular at the time, filmmakers like Tsai, eventually Apichatpong, many others, but that sort of blew my mind encountering those films for the first time. Goodbye Dragon Inn definitely, I forget who it was that referred to it as sort of like anesthetized or sort of like a how do I say it? It's something about like Dreyer would be rolling in his grave if he in admiration for this film, Carl Dreyer that is. Uh so that all very really intrigued me, and yeah, I watched that film. The way it, to encounter like a kind of film that was just privileging atmosphere above all
Mhm.
else, and not so concerned with kind of like narrative, that really kind of shaped the way I started to think about my own work at an early age, and because storytelling isn't something that I feel is A, natural to me, and B, it's not really what I think is really what I love most about cinema, you know? I think cinema is more about having sort of a vicarious, sensual experience, atmospheric experience. Um, yeah, so I watched the film pretty early, and I kind of always knew I wanted to capture a similar thing to what Sai does in that film, in terms of capturing that sort of poignance, uh, and that sort of yeah, it's a completely location-based,
Mhm.
mood-based film. And it's also about the end of something. So that kind of
Yeah.
like certainly was the seed for Eephus alongside other films like Last Picture Show,
Mhm.
The Last Night at the Alamo, Prairie Home Companion was certainly on my
Yeah.
mind in terms of constructing kind of the narrative framework.
And I'm also curious as to, throughout your career, I gave a very vague introduction about your role in the film because you are literally a utility player where in sports you can do anything. You literally do almost everything in this film. You are a co-writer, you are the director, you edited the film, you worked on the music. I'm also curious as to why you didn't shoot the film. You have a history as a DP, what was it about you tackling on every single role, but besides the cinematography, which I think Greg Tango does a great job in really helping
Mm.
capture that mood,
Yeah.
that you wanted to elicit throughout the film.
Yeah. I mean, it was certainly one of the difficult pills to swallow early in the process when I had to decide that, this is a little too much to take on, the
Yeah.
cinematography in addition to everything else. I mean, really I became aware of that in the casting process, that
Hmm.
this was just going to be so much maintenance of people, like having to be a leader and you know, speaking with actors every day and a whole group of actors and having to answer so many questions. I just thought there's just no way that I can, sufficiently give my attention to the image while we're shooting. So really, I spent a whole bunch of time, in the pre-production process and during scouting, just taking pictures of this field and building some very thorough kind of storyboards that I made in Photoshop based around images that I took and kind of like composited figures into the frame so that when I was first meeting with Tango about the project, I was able to show him some of this stuff and we got on the same page pretty quickly. So I don't want to say I like held his hand at all because he's certainly
Yeah.
extremely capable and I mean I'm definitely going to work with him again. He's a good friend and we had a great collaboration. But I think it really helped to have that like shared. We had so many discussions ahead of time, and I made him watch certain films, and we had a kind of like pretty solid shared language by the time day one of production.
And also, it's funny you mentioned the cast because I was going to bring up just how varied the ensemble is. I
Hmm.
was recently watching The Killing of Chinese Bookie, and when you watch a film like that, when you see how Cassavetes cast his actors, there's something lost on films today of just a lot of people in films don't look like real people. I know a lot of films have to get made because you need stars to sell these pictures, and it's
Hmm.
sad, but it's true. That's how the business works. But when I look at the ensemble for Eephus, I'm like, I know these people. These are people you run into at the grocery store in the small town that are at the barbecues, and I think you did a great job of compiling. I was wondering, how did that process go of finding who's right for the cast? How much of it was Keith William Richards, who is great in something like Uncut Gems, is probably the most notable of anyone, and a lot of unknown actors. I'm curious
Hmm.
as to what was that process like.
Yeah, I mean it was sort of like my intention and strategy from the very beginning to cast unknowns. I
Mhm.
also it's first feature. It's not like I
Yeah.
had access to major stars anyway, but I felt nor did I have the resources. And financing that would be necessary for that. So I mean, I just saw it as a strength. I think this film benefits from feeling like it's cast with a bunch of folks who are actually from the region,
Hmm.
and who actually existed in that specific town on that specific field in 1994. That was really key for me. And I wanted faces that were interesting and that told, a story, and it had a sense of history. And so that was kind of like really what I was paying attention to in the casting process. Is immediately, does this face strike me as lived in and regional? Uh, and I was casting largely from the pool of Boston
Hmm.
casting websites, and also I was pulling from many different people I've worked with in the past on films in college. I went to school in Boston, so I had a bit of a network there. I also brought in some friends, lifelong friends from my hometown who I just felt would be right for this world. And I always kind of saw a certain actorly tendency in them, even if they didn't see it. So yeah, it's really a composite of all those different things. And it was a long process. And of course, the trickiest part was trying to determine if someone had the athletic ability to actually be in this movie,
Hmm.
because I had to cast this remotely for the large part, from California, getting onto a Zoom call with actors and just trying to gauge, what's your experience with baseball? How long did you play as a kid? Do you understand the rules? Like some very basic questions like that. I mean, I really wanted it to seem like these are people who, although they're not, proficient players at this point in their
Hmm.
lives necessarily, they have a real sense of how to play, and they feel it. You can kind of feel it in their gestures and body language, that they have an experience with it. So that was a very long process, and then the rehearsals, there were definitely certain surprises along the way where it's like, okay, I thought this person might actually have more athletic ability than they had, and then sort of the script kind of had to fluctuate
Hmm.
accordingly. But I just kind of embraced that because I think that this is a movie about a league where it's just whoever's around and likes baseball wants to play, and maybe
Yeah.
they don't even really care about the sport. They're really just there for the camaraderie.
Hmm.
So people of all different shapes and sizes and varying skill levels. That was something I embraced as we went further into the process. And the rehearsals were very much like practices. And I had to play coach and kind of help them kind of relearn the game, basically.
I think also what's so accurate of Eephus is that it depicts men of a certain age, especially of communities like this, that when a major chapter of their life is coming to a close, they don't really know how to communicate that. And I think it would have been incredibly sappy or very overt for them just to explain how they feel. But all these characters, through their different backgrounds, are going on such random tangents and personal anecdotes that speak for themselves and how they're feeling. I'm curious how much of the writing was important to get through to explain all these different characters and the grief in a way they're feeling, but through untraditional methods, whether it's their playing style or one of them's just mentioning how life's a war, or they're just talking about just very things instead of just a lot of films today, they would have just verbatim just explained how they're feeling. And I feel that would have dulled what Eephus does so perfectly.
Thank you. I mean, yeah, that was sort of like a rule early
Hmm.
on. We told ourselves like we can't ever have people articulate the gravity of this situation because I mean, not only is baseball its own language that once you're on a team, you're speaking in certain lingo that is appropriate to the baseball field. And not only is that the case, but also we're in a specific region in this film that I think is so steeped in male peacocking and
Hmm.
competitive camaraderie where we're actually, putting someone down is sort of a way of expressing affection. It's
Hmm.
it's it's the world I'm kind of it's kind of why I left baseball, you know. At some point I got kind of sick of that. But it's this sort of male stoicism is a key part of this film, and everyone's sort of speaking in this coded language of baseball to sort of, you know, try to to kind of like hold on to this relationship that they've had for all these years, and like this is how they communicate, but also B, they just don't want to they don't want to get into it. It's uncomfortable. Yeah, they don't want to get into the kind of inevitability of the end of this shared ritual, essentially. So we really we wanted the guys to kind of speak in mostly in jokes and put downs, and you know, they might be talking about the game that they might be talking about the count in that moment, and but actually they're talking about something else, you know. And you can see that, I think, mostly in the body language, and I try to tease it out, you know, in certain ways with the visual language and the editing, and making you feel the kind of silences and the pauses, and you know, I think that's where the language of the film really comes out, you know, and the characters have their own vernacular we tried to just stay true to.
No, and I know we're getting close to the end, but I'm just curious also that time is an important thing in baseball, and more
Mhm.
so slowness in Eephus. There's slow motion, the Eephus pitch itself, the downtime that's brought upon from the game. I know slowness and them dragging them out is important for the characters in this film, but I'm curious, is that something you experience? You're incredibly young, and this is your first film, but do you find a similar sentiment that is lamented over some part of your life in any way with time itself?
Well, I'm not that young, maybe not as young as you think, but I mean, this to me is kind of an essential thing about the film, and about baseball too. I feel that though there are so many canonized baseball films,
Mhm.
I can't really think of any that capture the rhythm of the game in a way that feels authentic, at least to the way I've experienced it as a player and as a spectator. You know, it's a game, especially when you're playing it, that you really feel that downtime, and what you fill it with is socializing, and you fill it with sometimes just almost like a meditative state. You know, you can kind of pay attention to the wind in the trees, or you know, look at something on the sidelines as, you know, someone who just came in to watch the game or something. And then there's these sudden spikes of action where everything suddenly feels very urgent and important. Um, I found that kind of push-pull between long periods of stasis and sudden bursts of action felt to me like a pretty handy analogy for like the experience of living our lives, really, you know, long stretches of time that go by and sort of everything bleeds together, and then you have this momentous period in your life that, you know, you're always going to remember. It was very important to me to kind of use to really capture that experience of playing baseball. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, as far as how that relates to my own position in life, I mean, I moved away from New England about 10 years ago, which is where I'm from, and I'm sort of always, you know, I love where I live now, but I'm always kind of reflecting on that and reflecting on choices I've made in my life, and it also just feels like the pace of life has just really accelerated in the last 10 years, you know, and that has a lot to do with societal changes and
Mhm.
technology, and I find it increasingly difficult to savor the moment, savor time passing, and feel present. And it's sort of like a corny thing that could go on a Hallmark card, but I think it's really essential that we find time for this kind of meditative state, and that's what I kind of want to impart to the viewer with this film.
It's totally felt. I thought Eephus is one of the best baseball films I've ever seen, and something that's incredibly hilarious and also quite bittersweet. Carson, thank you so much for your time. I hope everyone goes out to see it whenever they can. I think it's absolutely brilliant.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it.